was appointed Major General, and his warrant, signed by the king and countersigned by the war minister, was dated August 24th, 1814. If the king did not restore him to the position of Master of the Hounds, at least he returned him his decorations and added access to his room, which appeared a singular favor and a step to greater distinction. But at this very moment, the Clermont affair appeared. The commandeering of the paymaster general's treasury without any justification being produced for the use of the funds superseded in his command. Masson mildly begged to be restored or to receive his service pay in Paris, October 24th. My long and loyal service, he wrote, the rank which I held at court, that of my family, gives me hope, my lord, that you will not hesitate to accede to my request. But the charges increased and became specific. Augereau, whom Masson asserted was hostile to him, intervened. He only concerned himself with the council of war. General Masson was preparing his defense, wrote one of his official biographers, when the Comte d'Artois, struck no doubt by the memory of the familiar name of the old court, and the Marquis de Champagne, to look for him and requested him to explain the circumstances which had given rise to the denunciation of which he was the victim. Unhesitatingly, General Masson replied. His reply, forcible and decisively, justified him. The Comte d'Artois commanded the cessation of proceedings. General Masson withdrew to his estates. These assertions were, as always, inaccurate. General Dupont, having postponed his decision on the entreaties made by Masson, the latter renewed them on December 6 to his successor, Marshal Soult, asserting that the minister had acknowledged the validity of his request and had even assured him that he was going to restore him to active service in Paris, at which he begged to be employed in the government of Paris. His request was vigorously seconded by his stepbrothers, Marshal MacDonald and the Comte de Spa. Soult did not allow himself to be influenced and went his way. On January 11th, 1815, Marquis de Masson, realizing that he need not expect a command, requested at least some compensation. I beg, he wrote, through the justice of your excellency, the decoration of the commander of the Legion of Honor. I presume, though, hope you will deign not to refuse it in view of my long service and especially of my long-standing rank of officer of the Legion of Honor. Officer? Masson was listed as a member of the Legion of Honor in his records of service dated March 14, 1806. He took that rank of member of the Legion in his marriage certificate in 1812. He is ranked as an ordinary legionnaire in all the lists prior to 1814. I fear everyone was deceived, himself included. He was without the insignia of the Legion as well as a district. He was advised not to appear at court. He was excluded from everything, quarantined as it were, and particularly humbled. This was why he disappeared and went to live in the country with his wife, who, pregnant with monotonous regularity, was on November 28, 1814, delivered of a second son, Charles Francois Frederic. Upon the arrival of the emperor, he compromised himself by a desperate action. He went on ahead of him, so it is said, and rejoined him in the forest of Fontainebleau, gave him his reports on the events which had taken place in Paris, and on the order of the reassembled forces at Villejuif, assumed command at the regiments and rejoined them. On the 4th and 6th Lancers, the 1st and 6th Infantry, he then went a step further. But in the meantime, he wrote, since the return of your majesty to France, right up to your arrival in Paris, I have sought an opportunity of serving you. And on March 20th, I marched at the head of your escort. That appeared possible. Nevertheless, his name appeared in none of the lists drawn up by Drouot of officers who rejoined the emperor upon his landing or spent the night of March 21st, 20 at the Tuileries. From this day upon which, if we believe him, he so distinguished himself until June 2nd, Masson kept silent. Did he think he would be included in a supplementary list of chamberlains which only appeared on June 1st, and among whom he did not appear? Perhaps he did. It is difficult to say. On June 2nd, in a letter to the Prince d'Acmule, the war minister, he requested his restoration to active service in his establishment in the rank of Major General. I have made no other request for reinstatement, he said, and I am restricted to requesting duty. On June 5th, he wrote to the Emperor himself. He recalled what he came to tell him at Fontainebleau on April 21st of the past year, and on March 20th of the current year. Sire, he wrote, your majesty will judge whether of all his servants still in France any have made themselves more worthy of your thanks than I, by my ceaseless devotion, and whether I may be allowed to lay at your feet the injured feelings caused me by the preference given to several of my companions whose conduct was opposed to mine. Sire, by the loyalty of which I have given proof, I could rightly hope to be appointed to a military post with your majesty, by my name the highest in the French magistracy. I could hope for the right of a seat in the Chamber of Peers. I do not claim at your majesty's hands that which I should have been doubly happy to owe to your goodness, but I beg you to grant me active service and an honorable status. The Emperor sent this letter on to his aide-de-camp, General Flat-O, who was besides the recipient from the war minister of a report dated the 4th on Masson's petition of the 2nd. On the same day, the 5th, without any inquiry, Masson was appointed or reappointed to the rank of Major General he had received from Louis XVIII. He said he was set apart to command a Young Guard brigade. He said he received the commission of a division of 2 regiments of Marines and 2 rifles. He said that on June 15th, he was appointed aide-de-camp to the Emperor General of a division, all after being Major General for 10 days. Oh, that was false. Masson was not employed in a military sense during the 100 days. On the return from Waterloo, although he had not been appointed a chamberlain, he performed duties as such. Attired in a scarlet coat, he showed diligence and loyalty and took a delight in asserting that he would accompany the Emperor wherever he went. He was now in a dreadful mess, overwhelmed with favors by the Bourbons. He had rejoined the Emperor and was in close attendance upon him. He could then say, perhaps even believe, that he would be banished. Socially, he was in a most difficult position, hard up, at variance with his family, an outcast from court and even from the city. By accompanying the Emperor, by following him with his wife and the elder of his sons, he had everything to gain and nothing to lose, even in the hypothesis which he had not up until then considered, that of the combinations which would constantly give birth to theories about imaginary fortunes. Such was the man destined to play the all-important role for Napoleon and to make himself master in the Emperor's house. None of the past is comprehensible if we do not examine a character who enlightens us better regarding the succession of events after 1821, in which hitherto he took a badly affected part, but the reported traits are enough to enable us to form at least some opinion of Masson. It is more difficult to be certain about Madame de Masson. She was stylish, intriguing, dexterous, and expert at praising, and always prepared. She was determined to keep her condition blameless, and to shun anyone who opposed the aspirations of her mode of life, which was obvious at a first meeting, but added to these traits was incredible endurance, contempt for luxury, a creditable punctuality, and evenness of temper, which allowed her to tolerate rebuffs without shrinking, and almost always to wear a happy expression, all of which no one would question. Gorgo, to be a match for the Masson family's extreme pliancy, imperturbable coolness, and refined education were necessary. General Gorgo possessed none of these qualities, born of a family which at the time was identified with the green rooms of theaters and the domesticities of the royal household. He was related to very nearly all those Gorgos who, under the common pseudonym of Dugazon, appeared before the French at the opera and the opera comique, and so made their mark that their names became a byword. His grandfather, Pierre-Antoine, after making an unsuccessful debut at the Comité, roamed about the provinces, following different callings, even that a hospital director to the Army of Italy by Marie-Catherine Dumais, who also had played in comedy, particularly at the Strasbourg Theatre. He had at least 4 children, 3 of whom went on the stage. Jean-Baptiste Henri Gorgo, called Dugazon, one of the premier comedians in France, who married Louise Rosalie Lefebvre of the Comédie Italienne. The renowned Madame Dugazon, Marianne Dugazon, who made her debut in 1768 at the Comédie as a soubrette. Marie-Rose Gorgo Dugazon, who after marrying Paco Vestris of the Comédie Italienne, brother of Vestris I, the famous dancer of the opera, obtained on December 14, 1768, under the name of Madame Vestris, a debut at the Comédie, where in 1769 she took the premier tragic and comic roles. The 4th child, Pierre-Antoine Gorgo, Etienne Marie, did not go on the boards. He studied music with some success, received one of the 14 violins from the king with 1,500 pounds in salary and 500 pounds as a gift, to which was added the post of Monsieur Musicien Ordinaire at the Chapelle. This Etienne Marie married Helena Gerard, whose entire family was in the royal service and who herself was one of the nurses of the Duc de Berry. Of this marriage was born on November 14, 1783, Gaspard Gorgo, and then a daughter who became Madame Turenne. It has been said that Gorgo was the foster brother of the prince, with 5 years between them. Was he known before the revolution? Very little. He was 5.5 in the July of 1789, when the prince's son of the Comte d'Artois, until then confined far from court under the exclusive guardianship of the Duc de Sérent, their governor, accompanied their father when he emigrated. It was said that Gaspard was at first destined to be an artist, and that he had even spent some time in Regnault's studio. At what age? At 16, on September 23rd, 1799, he was admitted to the Polytechnic School, which was then a stepping stone to everything or nothing. He turned his attention to things military, entered the artillery school at Chalon on October 22nd, 1801, and left it on September 23rd, 1802, a second lieutenant in the 7th Artillery. He was a brilliant pupil and had marked mathematical qualities, so 3 months after leaving Chalon on January 4th, 1803, he was appointed to the school at Metz as a demonstrator in fortifications. With the 6th Artillery, he spent 8 months in the rank lieutenant and served as aide-de-camp to General Fouché de Carré, when the latter gave up the command at Metz to assume the second in command of the artillery at Saint-Omer. Gorgo was with this general in the German campaigns, was wounded at Austerlitz, and received the Star of the Legion after Poitou, second captain. On August 30th, 1808, he returned on September 22nd to the 6th Artillery and was at the siege of Saragossa. Thenceforward, he turned his eyes to the post of orderly officer, but what chance had he of attaining it? All posts as orderly officers have been filled, as well as supernumeraries. Wrote a companion from Madrid, himself an orderly officer. The way to attain your end would be to become an aide-de-camp to one of the Emperor's aides-de-camp, if there is anyone to whom you can be strongly recommended. Gorgo then began negotiations with General Lacoste, aide-de-camp to the Emperor, who commanded the artillery before Saragossa, but Lacoste was mortally wounded on February 1st, 1809, and the second in command, Gorgo, went campaigning in Austria without finding any opportunity of distinguishing himself. Scarcely had peace been signed when he wrote asking to return to Spain, where General Fouché wanted him. He was so certain on this issue that he did not await a reply and departed with his army and his baggage at Bayonne. He found in order to return to Germany. He offered as an excuse his excessive zeal and the expenses he had incurred. I presume to beg your excellency, he wrote, to be so good as to excuse my return to this latter army and to allow me to become acquainted with the manufacture of arms by working in one of these factories. I throw myself upon your excellency's mercy, he said again, to beseech you to overlook my wrongs and to allow me my expenses. General Cassandi, to whom the matter was referred, wrote in the margin, Mr. Gorgo has obeyed, acknowledged his error, is young and a good officer. Consequently, he has some claim upon the forbearance of the minister, and he suggested employment in the Versailles factory. He was appointed on February 24th, 1810, and from there he drew all his patrons into a whirl. He thus became associated with Monsieur de Nansouty, first equerry, who, in the absence of the Grand Equerry, directed the duties of the orderly officers. In August, he was added to their roll. It was heaven opened, but replied the Grand Marshal to a minister who was importuning him on Gorgo's behalf. Up to the present, His Majesty has refused to make any nomination and has adjourned the matter indefinitely. This postponement was all the more serious from Gorgo's point of view, for at that moment he was anticipating an unlooked-for marriage. If we are to believe his own father, she whom he so earnestly sought was neither young nor handsome, but she had money, was destined for still more, and was the daughter of one of the most renowned personages of the empire, Senator called Rodier. It is true that Madame Rodier, née Guattard, had been divorced and had remarried to General Poissonnier d'Espierre. Mademoiselle Marthe Rodier lived with her mother, and if the latter appeared well disposed, the senator, upon whom everything depended, did not appear the least inclined to give his consent. But Gorgo might overcome that reluctance if he presented himself as one of His Majesty's orderly officers. He was appointed on July 3rd, 1811, at the same time as Christian, Tantigny, Gal, Mavirad, and Lauriston. The proposal referring to him was couched in the most flattering terms. Is educated and capable, has fought well, is able to perceive keenly and to give a good account of what he sees, fully knows how to plan, speaks Spanish and German. The neat blue uniform with its silver trappings, becoming as it was still no reason for presuming anything relative to Monsieur Roederer. No one can tell me, he wrote, who is the father, mother, brothers, and sisters of this young man. He's only a captain. It is true he has just been appointed one of the Emperor's orderly officers, which will make him lieutenant colonel in a year or two. But even then, what is his financial position? Even when all Paris spoke of Gorgo's exploit at Givet in arranging the crossing of their majesties on a floating bridge when floods had carried away the proper bridge, Verdier did not yield. He gave his consent, but not his approval. Nevertheless, on January 1st, 1812, Le Chevalier Gorgo, orderly officer, received an endowment of 2,000 francs. That was at least a start. During the Russian campaigns, he sought and found opportunities for making himself conspicuous. Slightly wounded at Smolensk on August 16th, he was the first to enter the Kremlin and discovered the mine. This caused his creation as Baron of the Empire on October 3rd, actually at the same time as Montmar, Daudepoul, and Christin, his companions. But he thought there was no one but he. His energy was doubled. He was one of those who, after Jacqueminot, swam the Berezina before the erection of bridges to survey the opposite banks. He effected this for everything, fell before him on November 30th in an encampment near His Majesty's. Did he not find Colonel Roederer, elder son of the senator, wounded by a shot which had penetrated his lips, leveling his teeth to his gums? He took him to Ivan, the emperor's surgeon, had the wound dressed. It did not leave him until he reached Vilna. Upon his arrival in Paris, he believed himself authorized to bear the news to the senator, who received him politely, but all the same did not give way. He then appeared for the time being to abandon his suit and to devote himself to his improvement. On March 27th, 1813, he was promoted lieutenant colonel of the mounted artillery in accordance with the rules. He had now to leave the emperor's staff, but he had done his duty. He never shirked work. He knew how to beg. Actually, he had no special duties. It was agreed to create some for him. On March 27th, the emperor issued this decree: there is to be with us a chief orderly officer with the rank of lieutenant colonel. His function will be to arrange the duties of our orderly officers to sign their instructions and to communicate with them regarding the missions they are to discharge. The same day, he nominated Lieutenant Colonel Gourgaud to the duties of Chief Orderly Officer. This was an invaluable favor, yet one which was not destined to win the new commander any friends. The Chief Orderly Officer had, in the course of duty, access to the inner council of the Emperor. He took his place at table with the cabinet secretaries, had apartments in the palaces. He accompanied the Emperor on his travels, and became an officer of the household with all of the privileges peculiar to that office, and what is more, chief access. His salary, fixed at 12,000 francs from the privy purse, was more than doubled by gratuities and accumulated with the salary of his rank in the guard on June 20th, when the other orderly officers received endowments of 1,000 and 2,000 francs. He received one of 4,000 upon the personal instigation of the Emperor. On August 30th, after Dresden, he received the Golden Eagle, but still continued to strive for more. Truth to tell, one is loath to admit all his stories, for he was the only one to vouch for them, and certain of them were strongly disputed. For instance, he related that on January 29, 1814, on the eve of the Battle of Brienne, he killed with a pistol shot a Cossack who was on the point of running the Emperor through with a lance. He even had the account of this noble deed engraved on the blade of his sword. Napoleon, when this was brought to his notice, denied the fact in a very forcible manner in the presence of Gourgaud, who could neither prove it nor excuse himself, but nonetheless had it afterwards recorded in his records of service. On February 11th, he was wounded at the Battle of Montmirail. Slightly, no doubt, for on March 8th, he is said to have led a successful expedition with 2 battalions and 3 squadrons of the Old Guard above Chivy and Laon. These various feats of arms brought him on March 15th the rank of Colonel of the Horse Artillery, and on the 23rd the title of Commander of the Legion.